Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjananjalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam Pangam langhayate girim Jatkripatam maham vande Shri Guru Dinasharinam Ajanalambita Buddho Kanakavadato Sankirtanika Pitaro Kamalayataksho Vishwambaro Pitavaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunaravataro Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhu Bhavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Prabhus, accept my obeisances. All glories to Prabhupada. All glories to Prabhupada. So welcome to our dialogue on Books Are the Basis Week, organized by the ISKCON Ministry of Education. It's really a privilege to be in your company of such senior Vaishnavas on such an important topic. We have with us this afternoon Her Grace Rasa Stali. She's based in Durban in South Africa. She joined ISKCON in 1991. That's almost 3 decades ago, and has been an avid book distributor, now involved in brand and social media network for the biggest temple in Africa, Shri Radhanath. Rasa Stali, thank you so much for making time. We're really happy to have you here today. Then we have Rajabasi Prabhu there in Johannesburg, the temple president in ISKCON Santon. Rajabasi Prabhu is also a sannyas candidate and the head of the Ministry of Education here in South Africa. So we're delighted to have you, Rajabasi Prabhu. He's been a devotee since 1995, Hare Krishna. So it's a very long time ago. And of course, we have His Grace Srivas Prabhu, who's the regional secretary for West Africa. He's a scholar and a teacher and initiating guru in ISKCON. And Srivas, we are delighted to have you also. Hare Krishna. I want to thank the Ministry of Education and the co-Ji-bi-si Minister, His Grace Tapan Mishra Prabhu, for all the wonderful work that they do to try and enable us to have these kind of conversations, to encourage the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. They're really the engine room, working tirelessly to advance the culture of reading and appreciating Srila Prabhupada's books, pushing the boundaries and winning hearts, and most of all, building a support mechanism that we all need to help us get to an acceptable level of commitment. So the Ji-bi-si Ministry of Education, we are really grateful for all your efforts. Thank you so much. So I think we can get into it immediately. The topic is the books are the basis. And then there's a week dedicated in the year. It's 7 days call of action out of 365 days of practice. We're trying to get the devotees to commit to the 365 days. So really it's a catalyst, this discussion in the week-long celebration. And personally, as I said before, I'm very grateful. Rasa Stali, maybe we could just start with you. Did Srila Prabhupada's books play any role in your decision to join ISKCON in 1991? It was an interesting time in South Africa's history, as we all know. It's the first time that Black children were admitted or allowed to enter white schools in South Africa. So education and books had a different meaning there. Could you maybe share your perspectives with us? What happened back then in 1991?
Hare Krishna Govardhan Prabhu and all other Prabhus, thank you so much for this opportunity. So Govardhan Prabhu, I think many devotees who are in my position, who did not get to meet Srila Prabhupada directly, our next association with him was his books. So to say Srila Prabhupada's books have had an impact in my life is an understatement. Reading Srila Prabhupada's books have completely changed the trajectory of what I was going to do with my life. So reading Srila Prabhupada's books completely transformed my life. And what a wonderful life I've had. I can say that much. So if you touched on the political aspect of it. So I was in high school and there was a lot of discussion about apartheid and the evils of apartheid. And while I would sit in class and be part of these debates, I was always thinking that we can change a law, but we will not be able to change people's attitude. I recall when I was younger being a victim of racism from adult people. And I remember feeling so small and insignificant. And that experience stayed, up to today, I can remember that feeling. And we can change a law and everybody can be able to sit at the same table. But to actually change our hearts and our attitude towards one another, that's a completely different thing. And when I came across Srila Prabhupada's books, that's what Prabhupada spoke about. So it resonated so deeply with me on a heart level, on a social, political level. So yes, Srila Prabhupada's books are profound. And, I think the reach of what Srila Prabhupada's books can do is unfathomable and also partially perceptible, because it definitely made me understand that we're not the body. This discrimination that we were all subjected to was a bodily identification. And when I read Srila Prabhupada's books, it just filled me with so much joy to know that I'm something more than my skin. I'm something more than my covering.
Was there a particular book that triggered your devotional journey?
Well, I have to say I'm a Science of Self-Realization devotee.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that, Rajastali. Rajabasi Prabhu, you were also in South Africa at that time, 1995. You joined. It was just really the dawn of democracy. As a Rajastali, you were describing a very difficult time. Did Srila Prabhupada's books play a role in your decision to become a devotee?
Oh, yes, certainly. I mean, I grew up in Soweto. My family's in Soweto. And just next to Soweto, you had Lenasia. And we had family friends from Lenasia. So, there would be an exchange of stuff, the cooking stuff and the books and stuff would change, because we had family friends there. But just in terms of understanding, my understanding, even the books and the knowledge that I got from, friends, family friends, the knowledge was always, well, let's say I was a Mayavad, I was an impersonal. So I dealt with things on an abstract level. I mean, that's, it's what gave me life. All definitions were, were not very concrete. And that's how I saw the world. And then I went to the Joburg Central Library. I was at Wits University at the time. And they didn't really have the stuff that I wanted. I went to the Central Library. It was open at the time. And I got the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. But because I had read, I think, about two copies of the Gita, of the Bhagavad Gita, I didn't take the Gita at the time. I took the Light of the Bhagavat in another small book. I forget which book it was. But what really inspired me to take the book was that Prabhupada at the back, I was reading the smaller book, Prabhupada at the back, he says, I know who God is. I can show you who God is. I know where he lives and what he looks like. And for me, this was the first time somebody had ever spoken like this to me. God was always an energy or light or something like that. So this really changed my whole outlook. Even though I read both books, I didn't understand anything. Even after reading the book, I didn't understand anything. But the impression was left. A deep impression was left. And I eventually went back and got the Bhagavad Gita. And then Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. And that, of course, also added some extra dimensions to my understanding. So yeah, Prabhupada, I would say, to answer your question, Prabhupada's books played a major role because that's the first I came in contact with the devotees. And it's changed me from, I guess I'm still somewhat of a Mayavad and an impersonalist, but it changed me a great deal, that at least now I am moving towards being a personalist, understanding Krishna and understanding people, which, by the way, is in Africa, it's the thing, personhood and interpersonal relationships are a deep aspect of African traditions all over. For instance, it's described, how do you measure a person? How do you call a person in some African traditions? And the measure of a person being a person is by his dealings with others. His morality is dealing with others. He's like that. Then if you have those qualities, then you are a person. And the less of those qualities you have, the less of a person you are. So I would say, apart from it making me become a personalist, but it also it gave me the intelligence to be able to deal with the community that I grew up in a way that they could also relate to from a personal level. Because initially I was too much of an impersonalist. Like, I was here, I thought the people were here, but Prabhupada changed my dynamics to actually see that they are persons also. So it changed a lot. It changed a lot in my life over there. Prabhupada.
I think it's interesting that at that time you say you got a book in the public library. The government of the day in that time, the 70s, 75, when ISKCON was being registered, they refused to register us as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They said, no, you should register as the South African Society for Krishna Consciousness. So it's interesting you got a book at a public library. That's wonderful. Srila Prabhu, West Africa had a head start in Africa, right? You were already 3 decades. I think one of the first countries in Africa to have its total independence. What was it when you joined? Which year was that, and how did that happen? Was it through a book? Can you share something with us?
Yes. Krishna consciousness came to West Africa, I think 1979. Brahmananda Swami then, and then Bhakti Tita Maharaj. They started distributing books in Lagos, Nigeria. And then 1980, the first temple was opened. And then 1981, devotees were sent from Lagos to Ghana, Accra, to establish a center. Around that time, I was in college and I was curious about life. I had been to a number of spiritual organizations, including Ananda Marga, Ekankar, Rosicrucian Order, and others. But I wasn't getting what I was looking for. I had a feeling that God must be a person, because everywhere I went, they are talking about God as light, God as energy, God as that. But I wasn't very convinced. So I was still shopping from place to place, looking for the right information that will tell me exactly about God. So it was at an Ekankar regional meeting in April 81 that the devotees, they had just come into Ghana to establish a center. And so they were looking for places where they could interact with people. And so when they saw the advert of this ISKCON regional meeting, regional conference, that included all the West African countries. So they thought that was the best place to go. And so they came. So during the seminar or conference, the leader of the ISKCON group, I think he is passed on now, Mr. Benji, he spoke about soul travel. He described beautifully how one can move from one plane to another plane to another plane to another plane until you enter into the soul plane. And then in the soul plane, you would hear a very sweet flute music. And they said that is the flute of God. And so after he narrated all these wonderful experiences into the soul plane, the devotees were there. About 3 of them, they were in the program. So at the end, there was time for questions and answers. So the devotees, the temple president then was ISKCON Prabhu. He raised his hand and asked a beautiful question. He said, all that you said about soul travel from different levels until you enter the spiritual sky is perfect. But I want to know, who is that personality blowing the flute? Who is behind the flute music? And the head of the ISKCON organization, he said, because they're impersonalists, he said there is no personality behind the flute, that God is impersonal, God is light, God is sound, God is energy, and so there's no personality behind. Then ISKCON Prabhu did not take it lightly with him. He gave a very beautiful analogy. He said, if you enter this hall, we're in a big hall in a college. If you enter this hall and you hear some sound and you do not see the source of the sound, does that mean that there is no person behind the sound? So he said, somebody may enter the hall, he may not hear any sound. Somebody may enter the hall, he may hear the sound, but he won't see the source. And yet the third person may enter the hall, hear the sound, and see the source. And therefore, the person who hears the sound and sees the source, he is the topmost. Then he ended by saying, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is responsible for that flute music. He's a flute adept, and he enthuses everyone in the spiritual world with his flute music. And so immediately I felt these are the people who can answer my question, because they are telling us that the flute that ISKCON is talking about, there's a personality, and that is Krishna. And so we were about 10 students in that meeting. So when we closed from the conference, we just decided to follow the devotees. And they had a bus, a book mobile bus, and they had displayed all the books in their bus. They had a stand and they displayed all the books. So we went there and we're looking at the titles of the book. And one book attracted my attention. It was The Science of Self-Realization. So I picked it up, and interestingly enough, I just flip open and I opened to the page, right to the page where Krishna is blowing his flute, the picture of Krishna standing in the Tribanga form, blowing the flute. So and underneath, Srila Prabhupada writes, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, blowing his flute. And the picture of Krishna was so attractive. I just felt attracted to that picture. And so I bought that book. And then I went to read it, and immediately I understood all my questions can be answered by the Hare Krishna movement. So I went back and I bought the Bhagavad Gita, I bought some other books, and then I began to read, and I began to chant, and eventually I visited a temple, and then somehow, by the devotees' mercy, we are still trying to chant.
That's really amazing. That's an amazing. recollection. It's really very inspiring. It's amazing how Srila Prabhupada's books have that. Well, almost each book has its own potency, finding a jiva somewhere. Rajabasi Prabhu, here in South Africa, you are heading up the Ministry of Education. So if we say that books are the basis, what does it mean to you personally or to the Education Ministry here in South Africa that books are the basis? The basis of what?
Yes, actually, that's the question I asked myself. Books are the basis. When I read the question, what does books are the basis mean? And the first thing that came to my mind is what is contained in the books, and that's knowledge, right? And what type of knowledge? Because all the books that are there that exist, there is some there's some knowledge that's in there. So for me, books are the basis means that it's a it's that which holds a gyan, or it's like bhakti in a printed format. So when we say books are the basis, it means to me that there's books that contain knowledge of Krishna, bhakti, that's complete, and naturally, after we've relished the books, like Mahaprabhu says, like it says, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami says in the CC, that when Mahaprabhu came, the first thing he did is he didn't distribute love of Godhead first. He tasted it first, and then he shared with the others. So I think books are the basis means, bhakti in a written form, and an opportunity for us to dive into those printed and written format, and then share it with others. So books are the basis. That's what it means for me. It means that, you have books that contain bhakti, and we've read it, we've relished at least somewhat the books, and now we are trying to share it with others.
Indeed, indeed. It's the foundation of the root or the supporting mechanism. Srila Prabhupada coined the term, Srivas Prabhu, from your perspective, if somebody in West Africa came to you and said, well, Srila Prabhupada's books are the basis. Books are the basis. I mean, what did you understand by that? For a new person who comes today and joins ISKCON or comes to a Sunday program and he says, well, I've read that Srila Prabhupada says that books are the basis. I mean, what would you respond to such a new devotee?
Yes, my response will be, yes, these books, they form the basis of our spiritual understanding. They form the basis of our spiritual education. They form the basis for our progress on the path of Krishna consciousness. And they actually form the basis of the whole of our movement. Because before Srila Prabhupada went west, he went to America, he made sure he had something in his hand. And that was the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And based on that first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, he was able to establish the whole organization, ISKCON. So individually, our spiritual progress depends on the knowledge from these books. So individually, these books are the basis for our spiritual progress. Chanakya Pandit says, knowledge is a friend of that person who is on a journey. Knowledge is a friend to a person on a journey. We are all spiritual seekers. We are all on the path of bhakti. We are on the journey of bhakti Godhead. And therefore, this knowledge is required. And Srila Prabhupada has provided the basis of this knowledge by translating these Vedic scriptures and giving his Bhakti-Vedanta purports. Now, for the movement to grow, this knowledge is required. And even for the movement to sustain itself, this knowledge plays a role. So on the individual basis, We need this knowledge to grow. And for the expansion of the movement, this knowledge is required. And we can see how many scholars, professors, institutions, universities, they are taking shelter of this knowledge. So any progress we are making in Krishna consciousness is all based on these books that Srila Prabhupada has given us. So for us to progress, we must therefore take these books very, very seriously. If we really want to make progress in Krishna consciousness, we must accept these books of Srila Prabhupada as the guiding material for our progress. So that is my understanding that the books are the basis.
Indeed, indeed. And Srila Prabhupada even said that it's the basis of our movement. Without them, preaching has no effect. That's just not you preach to so many people. I mean, as a book distributor in Cape Town in those early days, so many new people that received these books. I mean, how would you respond if you were back on the street and somebody approached you and said, well, I've received this book, I've read one book, and, I'm sufficiently convinced, but your founding teacher says that it's the basis of everything. I mean, how would you respond to them? What do you understand by that statement, that books are the basis of our movement?
Well, the short answer is yes. That is the short answer. I think Rajabasi Prabhu said it quite beautifully. I don't think I can add anything more to it. But the idea of Srila Prabhupada's books being the basis, it's not just a nice coined phrase that we start to use and we hear over and over again, and suddenly it loses its meaning. For any bhakti practitioner, Srila Prabhupada's books is our reference. We keep going back to it for growing our faith, for deepening our faith, for clarification, for sharing and talking to other people. So if somebody says to me, books are the basis, I said yes. And as time goes on, I think it will become more and more prolific exactly how much those books are the basis.
Yes. Thank you for that. Srila Prabhupada did say that these literatures are the solid ground upon which our movement stands. So it should be available to everyone. Now, I want to take this conversation a little in a different direction. I have never personally seen any data or any surveys done or analysis done of just how committed, because we have a very valuable canon of literature, right, written by Krishna's pure devotee, presented in the way we can understand it. But I've never really seen any data of how many devotees regularly read or how many pages they commit to reading a day. I know from a BBT perspective, we've done some calculations that since Srila Prabhupada's time, we've distributed something like 560 million pieces of literature. And if you take that time period, it means somebody on the planet receives one of Srila Prabhupada's books every 3 seconds. And that's quite a phenomenal achievement. We also know that Srila Prabhupada made very strong statements. And he said something like, I've written these books for you, word by word. If you don't read, you will get restless. And Prabhupada gave that example. Then you'd want to go from Japan to India, India to Japan. I'm laboring for you. I'm doing my duty. I am giving such a valuable thing. Day and night I'm working. If you don't take advantage, what can I do? Now, this is a very powerful and a heart-rendering statement that Srila Prabhupada made. Now, as leaders here in Africa, what can be done? What should be done? What can be, if it's not done, or if it's done to be redone, what should we do to bring Srila Prabhupada's request? Please read my books to the heart of every devotee. Rajabasi Prabhu, here in West Africa, what is needed? Is anything needed? Is the culture of reading entrenched? Or if it's not, what can be done?
Well, that is a very big question. It's a loaded question. it is a fact that when devotees, or if devotees study Srila Prabhupada's books systematically, regularly, they become stronger, they become more enlightened, they become more enthusiastic, they become much more inclined to practicing bhakti. And the opposite is also true, that those devotees who do not read regularly, who do not study regularly, who are not into Shastric study, their mood is also different. It's a fact. We can see this on the ground. So it is very, very important that devotees must be encouraged to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And of course, the challenge is there. In West Africa, some devotees are not very much educated, and so they are not inclined to reading. And even those who are educated, they do not have the enthusiasm to read on a regular basis. Maybe they just read when they're going to give a class, or if they have some program, some seminar or something. So the challenge is there, that many devotees are not reading as we should. And therefore, it is the responsibility of the leaders to find ways and means to encourage devotees to read. So this resolution that was passed by the Джи-би-си, giving us a week of reading, it helps us to remind devotees, it helps us to project the importance of reading, it helps us to organize seminars for devotees. And so we have to look for similar avenues, similar programs that would encourage devotees to read. Actually, we're even thinking that maybe we should set up a prize-giving system just as a way of motivation. If somebody is able to read a certain amount of books, we give him a set of Bhagavatam or a set of Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we are considering instituting some kind of awards ceremony. And then those who will be enthused to read, then we can give them a set of Bhagavatam, a set of Chaitanya Charitamrita, or some books of Srila Prabhupada. So the challenge is there. Many devotees are not reading, either because of their service, either because they are not interested, either because they don't see the value of reading. These things are there, but it's the responsibility of the leaders to figure out how we can find ways to encourage devotees to read.
In Rajabasi Prabhu, where you are as the head of functional education ministry for a huge, congregation base, do you have any working successes, strategies, plans that the ministry is working on to try and encourage high levels of commitment to reading?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu, for the question. So one thing that, I've been involved in education for quite a few years now, quite a while. And I remember maybe even 10, 15 more years ago, dealing with devotees that especially many of our householder devotees, they had a desire to study and do their Bhakti-Shastra. And study, like systematically, moving from point A to point B in a systematic way. And they found that it was a little difficult because at the time, if you wanted to do your Bhakti-Shastra, you had to go to Maya or Vrindavan and spend 3-4 months there to do your Bhakti-Shastra. And for most of our, Grihastha Vaishnavas, it wasn't possible. And then we saw last year, Maharaj, His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj had a desire to teach Bhakti-Shastra. And also on my own I was teaching devotees Bhakti-Shastrы online, but the most I had online was about maybe 12 devotees that I had at the time. So when Maharaj came, and then he spoke about his desire, then we organized the Bhakti-Shastrı online, and there was an explosion of registration. So many devotees from around the world actually registered for the course, and many of them, I would say over 70% of them graduated, and the other 30% that they didn't graduate, was because circumstances changed all the time. But the desire to still do it was there. And some of them had figured out that, they hadn't anticipated the intensity of the study program, even though Maharaj had somewhat simplified it. So I think that there's a very, very strong desire for devotees to study, because generally when we say devotees should study books, it can get quite confusing. How do you do that? How do you study? Do I pick up the Bhagavatam and then, read page to page until I finish? Does it constitute studying, or do you have to take notes? So it's when we say study Prabhupada's books, it can get unclear sometimes. But one thing is that I found the devotees do have a desire to study. Many of the devotees do have a desire to study, but in a systematic way. So when you're presenting a course, there should be a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion, so that when they finish the course, there is a sense of accomplishment. I went there, I did something. And then, just as a point of interest, Prabhu, after I spoke with you this morning, see, we have 3 programs today. The first program was from 11 to devotees of just finishing up now. It's a preaching program for new people. So we had about 15 people there, 10 of them were new or so. And then the rest were the devotees. And then after this program, we have Maharaj is having a Saturday program. So I took the opportunity to ask both the devotees and the new people that have come for the program, what would inspire them to read books? Specifically with the devotees, what would inspire them to read books? And I find that the same thing is there. I mean, these are young devotees, let's say from 20 to maybe 30 at the most, 32 years old. And all of them have a desire to study Prabhupada's books. So I asked them the question that you said. What do they feel is the main obstacle to preventing the devotees from reading Prabhupada's books? And they said to me, there's consistency in terms of what they were saying. That we should make the books more relevant to the devotees. Not so much in terms of the content, but in terms of the presentation. They gave me examples of YouTube, that YouTube is a big thing, and TikTok, whatever, the social, it's a big thing. And people nowadays read with visuals and sound. And so I asked them, so how do you do that? I mean, how do you take Bhagavatam and then, put it into what you are speaking about? I said, well, you don't have to do the whole thing. You can do like section by section, with visuals, pictures and stuff. And so when people do like that, actually it's attractive, and it also is engaging to people. So I find, and this is the strategy we were speaking about that we're incorporating now, is that we are thinking of incorporating now, is that, just picking up the book and reading. I mean, maybe it's good for Srila Prabhu and yourself, Govardhan Prabhu, Rasa Stalin and others. But for the younger generation, it's a little more difficult. So we have to see how we can incorporate that. So we are doing that, just seeing how we can incorporate visuals and sound and all of that in presenting Bhagavad Gita to the devotees and to the newer people.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, Rasa Study, you are the head of social media and marketing at the biggest temple on the African continent, right? I mean, so Rajabasi Prabhu was saying there may be opportunities for YouTube or social platforms. Are you thinking of anything like that, or you've tested anything like that, or any plans for increasing book distribution and reading through social media?
So I have to be very honest here, and it's not something that I have given consideration to. But hearing you sharing those ideas, Rajabasi Prabhu, they're wonderful ideas. And what I can offer is we would, as ISKCON Durban, we would share those kind of things if the education ministry were to put it together. Absolutely. We could facilitate that.
There we go, Raj. That's a golden opportunity.
The good thing is that we also have, with the team that for this outreach that we're doing, we have a nice team of devotees. Some of them are like technology, they went to university, study technology. So hopefully we can use those skills to build towards what we are speaking.
I grew up, I grew up in Krishna consciousness. Where you treat reading as part of your sadhana. It's a daily dedicated commitment of personal spiritual investment. And it's clear for many devotees, as Srila Prabhu says, that they carry a different mood and a different evangelistic spirit when they're connected to the pages of Prabhupada's books or Prabhupada's words. But very often you also hear they're like very serious challenges. Like, some would say that the books are too difficult to understand. They struggle with the strong statements in the books. They say that there's a lot of repetition. And fundamentally, I have no time to read. Material life is so busy. And, when they do read, they say, well, I've just read a whole book, but, I can't remember a word that I've just read. So I ask myself, why am I bothering to read? Now, amongst you, there's over 100 years of Krishna conscious experience right in the front line. How would you respond to these challenges? If somebody had to say, Rajabasi Prabhu, and as a candidate sannyasi and a preacher, we engage every day on interfacing. How would you advise somebody, devotee who comes to you and say, listen, it's too hard to understand. I have no time. The books are repetitive. And I can't remember what I'm reading. Well, what did your advice be?
I went through the same. When we began the introduction, I did mention I read the books. I didn't understand anything. I liked the mood, but I didn't understand much of what Prabhupada was saying. I think it was On the Way to Krishna, the small book that I mentioned. But one thing that I've also seen over the past year with the COVID, one thing that has exploded and seems to be successful the world over is book clubs, online book clubs. I found that people are very enthusiastic. Even devotees that didn't really have the motivation to read, but once they're in an association like that, others inspire them to read. And I've seen that practically also in the few book clubs that I've been invited to and that I'm participating in. So book clubs are a nice way of doing it. But I would answer the person saying that, yes, I understand. I've been there. I've read the books I haven't understood. So just try and find similar-minded devotees to associate with, and then reading naturally increases. I'll give you an example of in the past. I had somebody in Cape Town who, they had been coming to the temple for decades, visiting and all of that, and they would read, a little bit here, a little bit there. And they thought that they knew the philosophy. And then they joined this book club. And I can say since, how long has it been now? Maybe a year and a half. They've finished Bhagavad Gita. They are now reading the third canto of the Bhagavatam. And this is somebody who didn't really have any interest in reading. They had things like, Prabhupada's books are repetitive and, they're too harsh and all of those. But once they got the proper association, they began to read and get inspired. And these groups generally are like once a week. Some of them are more than a week. So that would be my response.
I know many devotees who read, like, for example, you read the 12 cantos of the Bhagavatam, and then you come to the 12th canto and you just start reading again the first canto, and it just goes on and on, because the books are so, they're so oceanic, and there's always something refreshing and something you caught again. But these points that I'm raising, Srivas Prabhu, as a spiritual master in ISKCON, right? Spiritual masters, Diksha Gurus do have a fair amount of influence on the disciple and to help them spiritually. So if a disciple came to you with this kind of, it is a practical consideration. I have no time, Guru Maharaj. All these books are too repetitive. And what did your advice be generally to, say, a young person who comes to you with that kind of mindset?
Yes, such devotees are there. They feel the reading Srila Prabhupada's books. No, there's no time for reading Srila Prabhupada's books, or they have no taste for reading, and so they have such complaints. But I will simply share my experience with such a devotee. In fact, when I joined Krishna consciousness, it did not take long, and I got involved into temple administration. I was made the vice president in Lagos, and then eventually became temple president for Ibadan. And since then, I've been involved in management. So in the early part of my life, I was into management, and I was reading little. I wasn't reading much because of organizing this, organizing that, running here, running there. But in 2007, I went to do Bhakti-Shastrы in Mayapur. And after doing Bhakti-Shastrı, I realized what I was missing by not reading Srila Prabhupada's books. So it actually served as a great impetus for me to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And that gingered me on to go for Bhakti-Vairbhava. And since after completing my Bhakti-Vairbhava, no day has passed and I've not read Srila Prabhupada's books, because every single day there is always something new. There is always something refreshing. There is always something interesting from Srila Prabhupada's books. So my advice would be that in the beginning of my spiritual life, I was too much into practical service, into administration, that I did not have much time to read. But I was simply depriving myself, I was starving myself of this beautiful knowledge, this beautiful nourishment that is necessary for our spiritual progress. So, because it's like you are licking the bottle from outside, how can you taste the honey? So reading Srila Prabhupada's books is like opening the bottle and really tasting the honey. So if you really want to enjoy Krishna consciousness, then you must read Srila Prabhupada's books. And Srila Prabhupada gives emphasis. He says, if you don't read my books, you will simply eat, sleep, and fall down. So therefore, if you want to make progress in Krishna consciousness, reading must be the basis. Reading must be part of your sadhana. Reading must be your daily activity. So that would be my advice to any devotee who comes to me with such a situation. We must read.
All glories to reading. Rajabasi, do you in Durban, you have such a huge congregation, right? On this particular problem statement that I have no time or the books are repetitive, have you encountered such comments from younger devotees or from devotees generally?
Yes, including myself. So look, the fact of the matter is that we have to make a personal commitment. As in the practice of devotion, it is a personal commitment. And we can hear somebody like Rajabasi Prabhu speak with so much passion and conviction and feel inspired by it. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individual devotee to make that commitment. And there's a few ways. There's reading Srila Prabhupada's books, there's studying Srila Prabhupada's books, and then there's actually learning what Srila Prabhupada is saying in his books. So I would say, if you pick up a book and you go from the front to the back and yes, I finished this book, and you put it away. And then you get the kind of reading when you open the pages and then you spend a little time with Srila Prabhupada and his words and hear what he says. And the repetition, I do not get offended by the repetition. The truth is, I'm forgetting every single moment that I'm not this body. So because I'm constantly forgetting that, and I'm constantly being driven by my emotions, and if it's driving me in a certain direction, I haven't fully embraced the philosophy, so that those reminders are not to offend us. And we should, I think, be humble and be grateful that we're getting the reminder again and again and again. We're not this body. It's such a big thing. Think about it. If we truly embraced that we're not this body, can you imagine how differently we would move through the world? The way we would treat one another. So that idea that Srila Prabhupada repeats it's because we didn't get it. And, it just takes a little bit of introspection to actually understand, yes, I'm always forgetting this. And therefore, I need the reminder. And rather than getting offended by the reminder, be grateful for the reminder and start to pray, when will I realize I'm not this body?
Well, Krishna's time factor has brought us almost to the conclusion of the time we have together. We have 5 minutes. And it was really a very interesting exchange. And I hope that the Education Ministry will allow part 2 of this conversation, because it's there's a lot of valuable and practical input into it. Now that we have to bring our exchange to a close, I'd just like to ask, there's the individual person, that's you and I. Then there's the institution of ISKCON. And, the institution generally is the enabler. It creates the opportunity. It's the facilitator and the organizer. But there is that personal commitment, right? Even if you had all of that, if one wasn't personally convinced or didn't relish or didn't taste. Like in my home where I live, we have our library where the temple room is. And as you do your puja in the morning, you naturally go to the next part, which is to read. And I can't imagine not reading on any day. Firstly, because I love to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And number 2, because I'm so dull with it. I have to keep, with that brilliant intelligence, and keeps your sanity in place. I want to ask you for a concluding round of statements. What would your thoughts be? What would your advice be? Given the fact that some of these conditioning is there and difficulties are there, in 1 or 2 minutes each or a minute each, what did you give as a statement of inspiration or encouragement for devotees who are coming through, who may not embark on a journey of regular reading? We started you, Rajabasi Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. I remember there was a time in ISKCON where if you sat for a Bhagavatam class or a Bhagavad Gita class, it was really a discussion on Krishna consciousness. Verses would be quoted, passages from other places would be integrated, and it would feel like a wholesome class, And I know from my own personal experiences, I would feel inspired to learn, to memorize some of the verses that I had, or to read some passages that were mentioned in the lecture. And of course, over time, because of the various reasons, the changing times, you find our Bhagavatam classes are slightly different now. We don't quote as many verses. We don't speak as much about, purely Krishna consciousness, our Sampradaya's teachings, purely without, adding psychology or this person or that person. So that sometimes it dilutes the experience of the hearer also. So I would say that if the leaders are embodiment, personifications of the books, if they themselves read the books, and then when they speak, of course, you have to measure the audience. But as much as possible, make the books interesting. Prabhupada speaks about the book Bhagavata and the person Bhagavata. So I think leaders should strive to be the person Bhagavata, so that when somebody's sitting there and listening to a lecture or a class, they should be inspired to memorize a verse or go research a certain passage somewhere else. So I would say that this really, for us to really inspire the devotees on the ground, it has to start with us as leaders. We have to read. And as much as possible, be chaste especially when we're speaking to an audience of only devotees. We don't really need other, stuff to make it look attractive. We can just speak about Krishna consciousness. And that's, for me, would be the answer to your question. Thank you.
Wonderful, beautiful, beautiful. Rasa Study? What are your concluding thoughts?
Thank you so much, Govardhan Prabhu. So I would say that if you're a practicing Vaishnava, whether you fully acknowledge it or not, Srila Prabhupada's books is the basis of your practice and your life choice. So you owe it to yourself, really, to spend time with Srila Prabhupada's books and develop your faith, nurture your faith in the choices that you've made. And I think you touched on it, Govardhan Prabhu, by saying how, you naturally want to read every day. And the more you read Srila Prabhupada's books, the more you relish them. That is the truth. There's no other way to say it. The more you read Srila Prabhupada's books, the more you relish it. And you can read the same thing a few times over, and every time you're deriving something new. Associate with the right type of devotees and discuss the things you read. Because even if you are in that struggle of getting into the habit, then when you're talking to the right type of devotees, like-minded devotees, like-hearted devotees, then suddenly the Shastra, the pages start to come alive. So look for the right association, make that commitment. We owe it to ourselves, really.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate that. You got to get the right connection, the right association. Rajabasi Prabhu, we'll leave you for the final word before I conclude.
Thank you very much for this wonderful session. Srila Prabhupada said Krishna sent him down to this world to offer to the conditioned souls the Vedic literatures. Srila Prabhupada was sent down by Krishna specifically to give us the Bhakti-Vedanta purports. And these purports are just like condensed nectar for our purification. And therefore, any person who desires to get out of this material world must certainly associate with Srila Prabhupada's books. So as Rajabasi Prabhu said, we the leaders, we must show the way. If we study the books seriously, it will reflect in our classes, it will reflect in our presentations. And that will inspire devotees to also investigate, to also take part in finding out more in Srila Prabhupada's books. So we have to set the example, and the example will come through our lectures, our interactions, and that will inspire the younger devotees to want to read and study Srila Prabhupada's books for their own spiritual elevation. Thank you for this section, and Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I'm so grateful and thankful for the opportunity to speak to the three of you. I am also a beneficiary of the science of self-realization. When I was 14, I received that book. There's a sannyasi who lives here in South Africa, His Holiness Parthasarati Das Goswami. He was having a Harinam party in a little it's a huge residential place called Phoenix. And I was at that time, like a born-again Christian. I mean, like a really serious born-again Christian. And I saw these people, and I thought, I got to save these people. Although I was a little guy, I had gone to save them. So there was a devotee in that group, in that Harinam party, who had the maturity to deal with me, So he just came very gently and said, you know what, here's something, just take it and read it and tell me what you think. So I looked at that book with Prabhupada, with the Chadar, and it had a magnetic effect. You wanted to take the book, but at the same time, you can't because, you're carrying a particular philosophy that you are born again and you've got to save these other people. Anyway, reluctantly, I took the book and put it under my jacket. And I walked straight home. It was a Wednesday, Ram Navami. It was 1982, I think it was. And I got home and closed my room door and started to read the book. I read that first 60 pages and I was just totally convinced. Everything that I held dear and everything that I was, even as a young person, Prabhupada dismantled it like to the core. The next day I'd become a vegetarian and I went to look for movies. So I appreciate Srila Prabhupada's books. I mean, I'm a living testimony. If somebody as dull-witted and unintelligent as me, who could read 60 pages, and some of the other get the association of so many wonderful devotees like yourself, being Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, I just want to share that with whoever I can. And for that reason, I read Srila Prabhupada's books every day also. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to you. Thank you so much.